Here. Okay, we're now not precisely live, but it is being recorded as is a requirement under the Municipal Act that our meetings be public, and if they can't be precisely public, they're recorded so the public can watch it at any point in time. So just for your information, City Clerk has turned on the recording. So with that, we can get started. So first item, Madam Clerk.
It's a roll call, Your Worship. I've taken the roll and all members of council are present with the exception of Councillor Parker.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Reading of the call, Your Worship, I would note that on September 16th, in accordance with the requirements of the Municipal Act, all members of City Council were given notice, including the one that's absent, that we would be holding a special meeting in this date to consider the proposal for the outdoor field sports field complex and reading of a bylaw to attract an amendment.
Very good. Thank you. And next item, please.
Under the order of general business, Your Worship, we have the proposal for the engineering consulting services for the outdoor sports field complex.
Very good. I'm not sure what the plan was, so we could take a motion, and then if there's a presentation from administration, we could have that. So go ahead, Councillor Fawcett.
Thank you, through Your Worship. That's a submission from Tetra Tech Canada Inc., the proponent that rated the highest in the evaluation to carry out consulting services for the outdoor sports field complex at a cost of $989,087.20. Net of GST be accepted. And further?
Yes.
Further, that the funds be extended from the Parks Reserve.
Thank you. Seconder, please. Councillor Lupke. Now, before I ask the mover if she'd like to speak, I'm not sure if administration, I think the presenter was Mr. Hammond. Go ahead, Dean.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a good news story, but it's kind of a long and convoluted story to get us to this point. So for the benefit of the public, I think some information would be warranted, but just wondering if you want the long version or the shorter version.
I trust your judgment. So we could, okay. I think most in the public even have heard quite a bit about the project, so you might narrow it up a little bit. So just hit the highlights, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay, well, I'll go somewhere in between. This story actually goes back to March of 2015, when the city partnered with the province of Manitoba to undertake a feasibility study for the creation of an outdoor field complex within the city of Brandon. The completed feasibility study and conceptual design for the outdoor field complex was presented to City Council in January of 2016. In August of 2019, the city submitted multiple applications to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ICIP. One of the applications submitted under the Community, Culture and Recreation stream was for a total of $12 million for the construction of an outdoor field complex at the corner of First Street and Veterans Way. At the special meeting of council held January 30th of this year to deal with 2021 budget deliberations, City Council motioned that up to $6 million in debenture funding be pursued for the outdoor complex project. The intent of that motion was that should the application to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for field complex funding be unsuccessful, then at least the city would on its own have enough funds to at least start on the initial phases of the project. However, on the 20th of July this year, the federal government announced that the city had been successful in its application to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for the outdoor field complex. The approved funding under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program for the outdoor field complex project will see up to $4 million in federal contributions, up to $4.2 million in provincial contributions, and up to $3.4 million in eligible project costs on behalf of the city for a total approved project of $11.5 million. Now, this is a bit clunky because City Council motioned to have $6 million in debenture funding. Now that we know that we're successful in our ICIP application, we know that we will not need $6 million in debenture funding. However, the timing of the announcement from the federal government on the ICIP application happened to coincide with the public hearing notices that went out for the public hearing for the borrowing for the $6 million. So at that time, even though we knew we weren't going to need $6 million in borrowing, we proceeded in $6 million in our borrowing application. That amount, of course, can be lessened. Whatever amounts we do not need to borrow can be essentially extinguished. So with that, 3 firms were invited to participate in a private request for proposal. If you recall, we had shortlisted firms for detailed design for this project. 3 firms were invited to participate in this proposal, and the recommendation from the evaluation team is to award to Tetra Tech Canada at a cost of $989,000 and change for the detailed design for the project. Because our funding approval has not yet been approved by the province, although we know that's coming, in the meantime, in order to keep this project on track, we're further recommending that in the meantime, the funds will be expended from the Parks Reserve. We are not anticipating that we will incur a lot of costs out of the Parks Reserve for this year. We're anticipating that we will have our funding approved from the municipal board by the end of the year. And when the real costs begin in earnest, that we can expend from our borrowed funds at that point in time. By issuing this award, which would happen tomorrow, if council approves it tonight, we will anticipate that detailed design can be completed in order to have an bid opportunity for construction of the field complex go out by spring of next year, in order that construction can start. And construction would occur over the next 2 years as part of our funding requirements for the ISTIP program. We need to have all construction done by September of 2024. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions of council on either the bid award or the funding process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hammond. That was the perfect length, well presented in terms of the history and all the main ingredients to this very important project. So we'll open up the floor. I will let the movers speak first, so Councillor Fawcett and then Councillor Cullen.
Thank you, through your worship. To Mr. Hammond. So is there any chance we would have this early enough that they could get that tender sort of pre-spring so that they could start moving earth where they need to do in the spring versus the summer or fall?
Through your worship to Councillor Fawcett, I'm not prepared to speak to that, but we do have an engineer in the room who may be prepared to speak to that.
Wasn't prepared for that, but I can. Through your worship to Councillor Fawcett, the consultant has already stated, as we did going into this, that we were probably already on an accelerated schedule. To accelerate that anymore, I think, would be somewhat of a challenge. So we're hopeful that, again, spring is 2 or 3 months, somewhere in there, and we recognize the anticipation, and we'll try and certainly get it done as soon as we can.
That's good. Fantastic.
Thank you. And Councillor Cullen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Dean. Sometimes when we have funding where we go ahead with it in advance, and sometimes some of the provincial governments supplying us with some of the money, it puts us in a position where money spent is not eligible for matching funds. Are we in that position right now if we go ahead and do this tonight?
Through your worship to Councillor Cullen, I'm not sure if we've actually signed our agreement with the province yet on the ISTIP funding, but the intent would be that part of the next steps will be to sign our agreement with both the province and the federal government, such that before we incur any costs for the detailed design, we'll have the agreement in place that all eligible costs will be subject to matched funding.
Thank you.
I think typically in those, you can't spend any money until a project is approved and or announced, and both of those conditions have been met, have been publicly announced by both levels of government. That's usually one of the trigger points, but Mr. Pulak, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, through your worship, council, I would just add that in certain circumstances, we have, prior to actually signing of the agreement, had a discussion with the infrastructure secretary and got permission to proceed with the design and asking that those be recoverable costs. So, I mean, if we feel like it's going to take time for the agreement to be signed, certainly we could have those discussions with the province and see if that's something we can proceed with.
That's pretty good point. So I think we should make sure we don't get caught in that thing. And Councillor Chaboyer.
Thank you, Worship. The design, we conceptually, we've seen conceptual drawings of what the design would look like. Are they basically following those preliminary drawings, or could it potentially change based on elevations, grounds, water, from what our basic understanding is what we're getting?
Yep, very good.
Through your worship, Councillor Chaboyer, so the detailed design will include all of the initial design elements that were included in the preliminary design, and I believe there's been some additions to that as well based on community need. I believe there's a disc golf component that's been added in. There's been some other components that have been added in. I can't remember what they were. But from an engineering standpoint, depending on what the consultants find, I'm anticipating that yes, there could be changes to the ultimate detailed design, but I'll let Mr. Allard speak to that. Mr. Allard's also on the project team.
Through your worship to Councillor Chaboyer, yes, I think there are opportunities. As a matter of fact, the consultant will take a step to confirm the conceptual plan. So for proposal purposes, they considered the conceptual plan that we have today. There is a step of consultation with some of the stakeholders, the sports groups, that type of stuff. We'll then reconfirm the conceptual design, and then through the stages of preliminary design and detailed design, we may have to address certain issues as you have identified, but we're early enough in the process that all of those things shall be taken into consideration as we go forward.
Thanks, good. Your Worship, can I have one more question? Any kind of idea when council will get a chance to look at what they bring forward?
I would think that probably late winter, early spring, we'll have some of those concepts that'll kind of be etched in stone, and then at that time we can probably present to council what the proposal looks like for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Dean.
Through your worship, I just wanted to add that as part of the RFP for detailed design, the consultant is to do community engagement with stakeholder groups, and I'm sure as part of those conversations there will be other elements that may come to the surface as elements that could or should or may be included in the final design. So and with even though we're arguably borrowing more money than we need to in this project, which again, we can downscale if we don't need it all, but that does leave us some room in the budget if there were other elements that council ultimately wanted to include into the project.
Okay, not seeing any other hands, so we may have it covered. But thank you very much, Mr. Hammond and Mr. Allard, for all that information. So we're back to the motion. Any further discussion before we call the question? Not seeing any. Call for the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Certainly, as Dean led off with, good news story. It's a very exciting project. Certainly going to be very welcomed by our community and by kind of many age groups and the like. As we know, there's, lots of different, a lot of people kind of think of it as a soccer park, but certainly many sports included in there, like cricket, disc golf was mentioned, and I think ultimate frisbee, and there's walking trails and little playground area and whatnot. So I think it's going to be a very active facility for our community on a just general recreation basis, but certainly it's going to be professional enough and significant enough scale. I think it'll have an economic development element to it in terms of, being able to host tournaments and, special events with certainly one FIFA-sized artificial turf that's lit. Obviously there's probably not that many of those in the province that we would probably be eligible to host some different events that way. So there's a lot of elements to this thing for our community. So very exciting time to finally be able to get moving on it, especially most of us in the room have been on this for many, many years, probably dating back, spanning about 3 councils at least. So this is all good. Thank you very much. So next item, please, Madam Clerk.
Under the order of bylaws, your worship, bylaw number 7318, which is an amendment to the parking enforcement bylaw regarding parking violations.
Councillor Barry.
Thank you, worship. I'll move that the bylaw number 7318 to amend parking enforcement bylaw number 7167 to replace Schedule A. Parking violations be read first time.
Seconded by Councillor Fawcett. And again, first reading, we don't normally debate, it just gets the process moving. So we're going to call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And next item, please.
A motion to adjourn would be in order, your worship.
Moved by Councillor Barry, seconded by Councillor Chaboyer. I just realized that everybody watching only got to see the back of my head, so hello, everyone. Call for the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. And this meeting's adjourned. There's another one. I'm going to switch seats now because I think presenter's going to have front of the house here.